Welcome, everyone, to the inaugural edition of Health Wonk Review on Air. I'm glad all of you were able to join us today, and we are waiting for our host, Jan Sidorov of the Population Health blog, to join us. And here he comes. I also have with me today my co-conspirator, Joe Paduta, and David Williams, another regular on the Health Wonk Review. Hi, Jan. Welcome.
Hello, everybody.
Hello, Jan. How are you?
It's nice to see the actual faces associated with all these folks that I've been Wonk reviewing with all these years.
Ah, wonderful. Usually when we go live, people aren't quite so excited to see our faces.
Great. Well, thank you all for joining us today.
Thanks for hosting, David.
A pleasure. For those who are not familiar with Health Wonk Review, I have dropped a link to the current edition in the sidebar. If it has somehow disappeared, I'll drop it again. And this is the latest in a many years long effort to share information about health policy, health, other sorts of healthcare developments on the blogs. And today we're trying to do that on air as well. So Jan is the most recent host on the Population Health blog. And let's drop that link. Jan, before we start, the last thing I'm going to say is please, everybody, subscribe to the upcoming editions via my Blab profile, and please join the conversation in the sidebar, and please, as we say, tell your friends and neighbors. Jan, I'd like you to let us know how you experienced the current hosting of the current edition, and if there are any particular posts you'd like to draw our attention to.
Well, it's always fun hosting, and if you're a blogger, it's oftentimes a labor of love because you not only get to write about stuff that you find interesting, but you get to learn about stuff that other people find interesting that you wouldn't necessarily know about. For myself, I think the stuff that I found particularly intriguing were the posts from Peggy Salvatore and David on stuff that's going on in mHealth. Tens of thousands of initiatives out there, ranging from apps to personalized web-based care management systems, empowered patients, linking to primary care systems of care that really transcend the old bricks and mortar approach to healthcare, all occurring without any nudging or regulations or statutes or anything from anybody. It's not just a ecosystem. It's a very exciting, flourishing area of healthcare innovation. And every time you read about new stuff, I think it's even more intriguing and more exciting.
I would have to agree with you. I'm very interested in that space. And is there anything in particular from Peggy's post that you'd like to draw our attention to?
Well, a lot of the standard stuff, if you will, on care systems out there, do-it-yourself care systems, are really focused on fitness. And the vast majority of the fitness initiatives out there, I think, taste great, but are really less filling, unbacked by any published evidence or any rigorous analyses. Peggy's post pointed to the other end of the spectrum, persons with chronic illness issues, chronic liver disease, for example, where there's a huge wealth of information that persons with those particular conditions can access and find out about. The proof is in the pudding about whether or not whether these support the ultimate goal of the healthcare system, the triple aim, better quality with greater efficiency and a better experience of care. And David, I think your post on something that hasn't gotten enough attention, I think, in the world of mHealth, and that's chronic mental illness. And I believe yours dealt with particularly medication compliance and side effects in persons with depression.
Right, with
I found
depression.
very intriguing. It's true. Lots of times medications don't work. Patients have to try them on a serial basis, and I think the app, as described, showed a lot of promise in being able to help persons try to find the right combination of therapies or therapy that minimize their symptoms and allow them to, continue in as good health as can be achieved.
Right. And I think the challenge or the tension is between wanting to share information like that with an ecosystem powered by Apple, for example, or, and the other side, the question is, are we more honest with our phones than we are with our doctors? There was actually a article about that recently. I'm dropping a link to that.
Yeah,
I think a lot of us may be more honest with our phones than with anyone else, particularly about something like depression.
I saw the same article. Persons are more honest in general with information technology that's gives the impression of being anonymous than being with a physician, even though one-on-one, and we're beholden to the same rules of confidentiality as everybody else. It may ultimately turn out, David, that the best way to get the information that people need is a combination of both physician care and information technology, and that by combining all of that into a combined approach, dubbed in some circles as decision support, may be the way to go. There's still a long way to go. The other point I'll make about the Apple product is that, I'm no IT guy, but I understand there are several stacks out there. That's what the IT guys refer to. Apple has one based on Apple technology. There's Java, which is open source, relatively cheap, and has a reputation for being stable. And then there's the Android system. So I can't blame Apple for wanting to grab a piece, of the pie, if you will, with their dedicated stack. But a lot of workers are working in using other forms of information technology to get us to where we need to go, and the race is on. Betamax versus the the current incumbent versus DVDs. We'll see.
Right. So to segue here, David, your post this week was about the question of how pharma should be marketing its advances, and some of the output from some of the mobile health applications that we're talking about are going to be better directed or more focused prescription of particular drugs. Could you pick up there, please?
Well, David, thanks for inviting me, because now I have a chance to see how good I look with these headphones. I think I'm going to wear them all the time.
We're going to get into the football coaching business, you and I.
Exactly. I'll have to carry one of those Microsoft tablets, though, if we do that. So my post was really focused on drug pricing, and it's always had me scratching my head to understand why the industry has been trying to justify high prices based on the cost of drug development. That always struck me as a strange argument. And now they've moved on to an argument that says, well, the drugs save costs and they don't drive up costs in the overall medical system. And that also seemed like a limiting factor to me, because I would be willing to pay more for something that does more, not just if it saves me cost. So with that in mind, I hope that the same people don't make the decisions about what to do with that information coming out of mHealth for prescriptions, because I don't know where that kind of logic would lead.
In terms of cost-benefit analysis?
Well, I think that the mobile devices are going to be providing all sorts of useful information for personalized medicine and for being able to really track what kind of outcomes are being generated. So I hope it'll be used that way. And I suggested in my post looking at things like quality adjusted life years, which is going to be a lot easier to track when you actually have patient input. So I think that the mHealth apps could be used to help set up value-based arrangements for payment.
Right. I think you had also suggested maybe revaluing a quality adjusted life year for purposes of these analyses.
There is an arbitrary setting of the quality threshold at something like $50,000 a year. And I don't want to let researchers do too much, and certainly not set what the value of a life is. So one of the things that I think the pharma industry might want to do is argue for why that quality threshold should be a lot higher than 50,000.
Okay.
If I could interject here, this strikes me as, to your point, David Williams, pharma is trying to justify the unjustifiable, and they're coming up with these increasingly convoluted ways of, counting any quote unquote research support as the cost of developing a drug, or however many sticky notes they bought, or whatever it might be. But at the end of the day, from an ethical perspective, a for-profit drug company is obligated to maximize shareholder wealth. Now, I'm not trying to justify in any way, shape, or form, pricing Harvoni. It's $64,000 a treatment course. But if they would just be honest with us and with everybody else and say, look, we're in this business to make money, and we're going to make as much money as possible, and that's just the way it is. I think that's the reality of drug pricing. And these other things, I think, are nothing more than sort of public relations attempts to justify a return to their stockholders.
I think that's fair. And the danger of doing something like trying to claim that you're basing your pricing off of your costs is that someone might take you seriously and put these so-called transparency rules into place and say, well, it's going to track every dollar that was spent on R&D, and then we'll see how that all ties together.
Right.
Of course, it doesn't make any.
Right. Excellent point.
Yeah, then you get into a cost plus reimbursement situation. I mean, to your point, David, about looking more broadly at the value and saying, if I have a rare disease, if I need a targeted therapy, cost is no object. How do you relate that to our problem of escalating health costs generally? We're creeping up on 20% of GDP for healthcare expenses. Is there a ceiling to any of this? How does the cost-benefit analysis key into your personal decision approach?
For some decisions, that cost-benefit analysis will make a lot of sense. So the argument, back to Joe on the Harvoni, is, well, maybe you can justify the $64,000 a year for Harvoni if you can relate it to longer-term costs, liver transplants, and so on. But you could also say, if you have a society with increasing wealth, where should that wealth go? Larger houses, fancier clothes, more diamonds, or maybe it should go into cures for diseases that aren't currently curable. And one of the problems with the pharma industry, looking at it from a cost basis, is that you then say, well, I can't really have an innovation like gene therapy because it's going to be really expensive. I'm never going to be able to show that it saves money. And I think we want to leave room for luxury goods to be cures, targeted therapies, and not Teslas and McMansions. So there's a ceiling, but it's maybe not more than 100% of GDP, but maybe.
Are you running for office, David? Well, I forgot this is a politics-free edition. Sorry, Jan.
Yeah.
Joe, did you want to jump in and get into another post from the collection?
Sure. And the one I'm going to focus on is Anthony Wright's, and it's about increasing the minimum wage good for the health, and that's specific to California. And there's a couple of quotes that I want to pull out of this that I think are really particularly relevant. Overall, Anthony's point is that when people have more income, they are healthier, and they also pay more taxes, and they are also able to pay deductibles, copays, et cetera. So it is not only better for that individual because they have more income, but it's also better for society because of these other sort of knock-on benefits. One is he makes the assertion that at $15 an hour, 77%, so 3/4 of employees will accept employer-sponsored coverage. And I think that's one of the major issues with Affordable Care and the desire to expand it is that people who are getting $10, $11, $12 an hour just can't afford health insurance, even at a massively subsidized price. So I think that's one of the tools in the toolbox to expand coverage is to increase people's ability to pay some nominal amount towards it. He also makes the point that, and this is a quote, as the minimum wage increases, we estimate, and this is talking about California, general fund spending on Medi-Cal, which is their Medicaid program, will decline by $700 to $800 million annually. Some working adults will shift from traditional Medi-Cal to the Medi-Cal expansion population. Others will choose to accept employer coverage, and still other working adults will enroll in Covered California, where subsidies are funded by the federal government. So multiple points by Anthony here, all tying improved health, improved coverage status to an increase in the minimum wage, which, quite frankly, is something I hadn't paid any attention to. I think an increase in the minimum wage is a noble and an appropriate goal. I think this is one aspect of it that, shame on me, I wasn't paying enough attention to. So as you expand the minimum wage, people are healthier, there's more coverage, there's less indigent care, which fixes some of the other issues. I shouldn't say fixes, ameliorates some of the other issues in the system. So kudos to Anthony for pointing those things out.
To me, the question is whether the $15 will in fact free up enough money to spend on health insurance, or does those dollars go to other sorts of expenses in a family? The other sidebar here is just picking up on Hank's post this week. Medi-Cal is not insurance, but that's not really an issue here.
Well, again, according to Anthony, his research indicates that about 3/4 of employees will accept employer-sponsored coverage at a pay level of $15 an hour. So, unfortunately, I don't know what it is at $9 or $10 an hour, but I would assume it's significantly less than that.
It's always struck me as interesting that if you took the minimum wage and you worked 2,000 hours a year, you're going to get to about what it costs to get family coverage. So you could spend all of your pre-tax wage on family coverage and have literally zero left over. So it's a good way to understand, what the minimum wage actually is and what it represents, and helps to explain why it would be hard for McDonald's, say, to pay the full health insurance cost for its employees. And regarding Hank, I don't think he's ever seen a government program that he liked. So I'm not surprised he doesn't like Medicaid.
Fair enough.
I would think that is a very accurate and fair characterization, David. And I congratulate you on following Hank close enough to pick that up, which, granted, you don't have to follow Hank very closely to pick that up.
If I can interject here, in the blog, I posted a more neutral perspective from National Public Radio. For those of you who listened to it, you may recall that there was a discussion of what's been going on in Seattle, which has had about a year head start in initiating the living wage for persons living within the city. It's less clear exactly what's going on in terms of person's lifestyle, and I don't recall NPR had anything about the impact on health insurance. The good news for those of us who do not live in California and New York is that we can sit back, our legislators, our elected representatives can sit back and see what actually happens in California and then make a better informed decision. But I think we have yet to see what really happens to persons and their health care in California as a result of the $15 wage.
Yes, 50 labs for experiments. We'll see what happens. I mean, it certainly seems to be a reasonable approach to increase the pay rates. So last week we spoke a bit about opioids, and there's certainly more developments in that arena. Something that we touched on then is featured in the current edition. I'll just mention it, the Purdue Pharma post by Ro Poses. And I was actually at a conference in the past week where Charlie Baker, governor of Massachusetts, was talking about the opioid crisis here and the steps being taken to address it. Some interesting approaches, and it was really an interesting talk that he gave about his awakening to the issue. And I know, Joe, that you were at a conference recently dealing with this issue as well.
And I've been focused on the opioid issue. One of my other business interests is myself and a partner run a trade group or consortium of workers' compensation pharmacy benefit managers. It's a very narrow sort of esoteric business, but opioids are a huge issue in workers' comp because, number one, about 35% of drug spend in workers' compensation is for opioids. Number two, the number one drug prescribed in workers' compensation is OxyContin in terms of dollars. 11% of drug spend is for OxyContin, which if you think about it in workers' comp, there is no cancer to speak of. There's no breakthrough pain, et cetera. So we have an awful lot of OxyContin prescribed for low back pain with no skeletal involvement, which is terrifying. The other major issue in workers' comp is if somebody is taking OxyContin or a number of other opioids, they are not going to be driving a school bus or working as an engineer or driving heavy equipment, et cetera. So they're not going to be back at work. And as long as you're not at work, you're incurring additional indemnity or wage replacement costs. So it drives up the cost. Plus, obviously, the whole shitstorm that occurs when somebody is taking opioids over a long period of time, their family devastation and comorbidities, et cetera. So that's all sort of background that in workers' comp, which is pretty unusual, we've been actually at sort of the forefront of dealing with the fallout of this issue. And I was at the RX Drug Abuse Summit, the fifth year this thing's gone on. And what was amazing was that President Obama actually came down and was tremendously knowledgeable about the topic, which at one time I'm thinking that's great. And another is, oh my gosh, if he's this knowledgeable about the opioid crisis in the United States, what does that say about how bad it is? And the answer is it's as bad as Iran getting nukes or something of that order, which is terrifying. So 28,000 people died of drug overdoses in 2014, the vast majority of those due to some sort of opioid issue. A couple of takeaways that also sort of shook me from the meeting is that over 3/4 of the people who are taking heroin started with prescription drugs. And the takeaway from that is that all started with a physician writing a script for a drug that didn't go in the right direction for some reason. So I had a really interesting conversation with a colleague who runs a rehab program. He's a pain management doc, runs a rehab program. And the question I posed was, would we as a society have been better off if opioids were never invented? And he makes the point, and it's a very valid one, that people have acute pain and serious acute pain or long-term chronic pain. Opioids are a lifesaver. On the other hand, 28,000 people died. So where's the balance here? And is there? And I just sort of posed that theoretical question to sort of try to make myself think about the severity of the problem and how we really need to address this. So unfortunately, the good news is the president's involved and they're doing a lot of things, and FDA is maybe going to be a little bit smarter about how they go about approving opioids. The bad thing is the president's involved.
Right. One of the things that Charlie said here in his remarks is that he noted that the United States has 5% of the world population and 80% of the opioid consumption.
Yeah.
And there's certainly some need for some of that. As you said, there are some significant pain management issues, but it's really out of control.
So it's interesting how we realized years ago that pain was undermanaged, and that led to vast use of opioids, partly through companies like Purdue Pharma that Roy profiles in his post. I think it's interesting to look forward and think about the policies that are being debated right now and what kind of impact they're going to have and how we'll look back on them in a decade. One of them, to me, is this question about medical marijuana and recreational marijuana. There's a very sort of hands-off view that marijuana is fine and that we should just have broader use of it. And I have a feeling that in 10 years, we may look back and realize that was a big mistake. Not exactly the same mistake as opioids, but maybe something of a similar scale.
Right. We've seen some of that in Colorado, where we see that even among the recreational users, people getting more edibles and overdosing, essentially. I mean, not overdosing, but overdoing it.
I think that's right. Also, I'm glad you wrote that post, David, about mental health. Because of the feedback here, I'm hearing so many voices in my head that I think that post may apply to all of us by the end of this.
Well, maybe Jan can help you with some telemedicine while we're doing this. We can do a little group counseling as well.
There's a drug for that, David. I'll help you.
No problem.
All right, put it into the sidebar.
That's an e-script.
Little e-prescribing.
Yep.
Little e-prescribing, telehealth, yeah.
So we're coming up on the bottom of the hour, and this is advertised as a 30-minute conversation. I know we have a couple of people watching us. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to drop them in the sidebar, and we'll try to get to them. And to the extent that anybody can, we can stick around after the bottom of the hour. I wanted to speak briefly, keeping in the general wheelhouse of pharma, talk about Tamiflu and the Tamiflu post in Health Affairs. So maybe this is the mark of a true health wonk, but I read that post and I said, well, I knew that the only benefit of Tamiflu was losing a day of symptoms. Didn't everybody else know that? So it's an us docs have known for the longest time that Tamiflu limits symptoms mildly, but if you want to do a quality per dollars per quality analysis of Tamiflu, I'll bet, I haven't done the analysis, that it's not going to it'll be far in excess of the $50K per quality adjusted year. So
Jan, forgive my total ignorance about Tamiflu. I wasn't smart enough to find a doc who'd actually prescribe it for me the last time I had the flu. Does it also reduce the symptoms while you're going through the flu? Reduce the impact of the symptoms?
Yes. The idea is that it shortens the duration of flu and modifies the symptoms a little bit. The debate that was reflected a little bit in the post from Health Affairs was whether or not you can start that medication when you're well into the flu, which is most people do when they're at their height of their symptoms. That's when they say, I can't stand it anymore, I need to see my physician. And by the time they come to see the doctor, that horse is already out of the barn. It appears, at least my understanding of the literature, is that Tamiflu works best if it's given earlier in the course, but that's not when patients typically see their doctor. And I think CDC is saying, look, even if they come in at the height of their symptoms, when the horse is out of the barn, Tamiflu could still be a benefit to some individuals. And that's where the debate begins.
I think my wife would agree with that, as I'm the worst patient ever and she has to care for me.
There are other ways to manage it other than a pill, as you know.
I'll pass that along to her.
Sometimes I've said to spouses, listen, maybe I ought to prescribe you a pill.
Well, as someone who had both the flu shot and the flu this season, I would love to have Tamiflu for that lingering cough.
Right. Well, hopefully it helps a little bit. I do not have at my fingertips a link for next time out, but if you go to my profile on Blab, you'll be able to find that, and I will hopefully be able to drop it in the chat after we're done. You certainly find it through the Health Wonk Review links and posts in the future.
Thanks very much for
Gentlemen?
hosting, David. Gentlemen.
Thank you.
It's been a sincere sensation as always. Thank you very much. And we'll see you next time with Health Wonks on Blab. Thank you.
Signing off.
Thank you.